On the morning of May 23, 1901, the public prosecutor of a quiet little town in France opened a letter that had no name, no return address, and only one chilling claim written across the page. There is a woman locked inside a respectable home inside this town, and that woman has been kept inside one single room for 25 years. The prosecutor read the letter twice. The prosecutor stared at the words on the paper, and then the prosecutor sent the police to a quiet street in the wealthy part of town, to a beautiful house owned by one of the most admired families in the entire region. And what those officers were about to discover behind the door of that upstairs bedroom would become one of the most haunting true crime cases in European history. Today's true crime story is the story of Blanche Monnier. But before getting into today's true crime story, if anybody watching is a fan of dark, mysterious, unbelievable true crime stories delivered in story format, this channel uploads new true crime content every single week. So please go ahead and slap that like button like it owes you money. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so no upload gets missed. Also, the Lego set being built during today's true crime story is the Lego Speed Champions Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat Sports car set 77237. This Lego set is a sleek, perfectly detailed recreation of one of the most iconic American muscle cars ever made. The Lego build includes the aggressive front grille, the wide racing stance, the signature Hellcat badging, and the kind of low, mean profile that makes any car person stop and stare. It's the kind of Lego set that practically growls when you finish snapping in that last piece. And honestly, building something that represents pure freedom and open road escape feels strangely fitting today. Because today's true crime story is about a young woman who, more than anything in the world, just wanted the freedom to live her own life, and what the people closest to her did when she tried to take it. Okay, with the Lego build started and the snacks ready, let's get into today's true crime story. The year is 1849. The city is Poitiers, France. And in a beautiful, well-kept home in one of the nicer parts of town, a baby girl is born. And that baby girl is given the name Blanche Monnier. Now, to understand the true crime case of Blanche Monnier, the listener has to first understand the world Blanche Monnier was born into. Because Blanche Monnier was not born into just any family. She was born into one of the most respected and most religious and most charitable families in the entire town. The Monnier name carried weight. The Monnier name opened doors. The Monnier name showed up in the local newspaper, in the church bulletins, on the lips of every gossiping neighbor in Poitiers. And Blanche Monnier's mother, a woman named Louise Monnier, was the engine behind that reputation. Louise Monnier donated to the poor. Louise Monnier hosted gatherings. She sat in the front pew at church every single Sunday. And nobody in that town would have ever asked Louise Monnier an uncomfortable question, which, as the listener will soon find out, becomes a very, very important detail in this true crime story. Anyway, growing up inside that respectable home, Blanche Monnier was a charming, social, well-liked young woman. Blanche Monnier attended the parties. She had real friends. Blanche Monnier was educated, articulate, and by every account from that time, genuinely beautiful. And by the time Blanche Monnier reached the mid-20s, the entire town of Poitiers fully expected Blanche Monnier to marry well, settle down, and continue the perfect Monnier legacy. Except Blanche had other plans, because around the age of 25, Blanche Monnier fell in love. And the man she fell in love with was, by every account, kind, sincere, and absolutely crazy about her. The problem? This man was a lawyer of modest means. No fortune, no estate, no social ladder to climb. And to Louise Monnier, that was an absolute non-negotiable deal breaker. So Louise Monnier sat the daughter down and made the rules very clear. The Monnier name could not, under any circumstances, be attached to a man without status. Blanche Monnier was to end the relationship immediately, find someone more suitable, and never speak of that lawyer again. And Blanche Monnier, in what was easily the bravest and most fateful decision of her entire life, looked her mother dead in the eye, and said no. That little word no was the moment the entire true crime case of Blanche Monnier began. Now, take a quick break from the LEGO Speed Champions Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat build for a second, because here is where this true crime story takes its first dark turn. At first, nothing dramatic happened. There were no slammed doors, there were no public arguments, there were no scandals splashed across the town. Just a slow, almost invisible shift. Blanche Monnier started missing parties. She wasn't at the next church social. She didn't show up to a friend's wedding. And every time somebody asked Louise Monnier where Blanche was, Louise, the mother, already had a polite, sympathetic answer loaded up and ready to go. Blanche isn't feeling well. She has nerves. She's resting. She needs her privacy. And the town of Poitiers, full of respectable people who would never dream of pushing back against a grieving, devoted mother, just nodded and moved on with their lives. Weeks passed, then months passed, then entire years passed, and slowly the name of Blanche Monnier started disappearing from conversation altogether. Friends stopped asking, neighbors stopped wondering, and Louise Monnier, the saint of Poitiers, kept attending church, kept donating to the poor, kept hosting elegant little gatherings inside that beautiful home, while upstairs behind a locked door in a tiny room with the shutters bolted closed, the daughter of the saint of Poitiers was quietly vanishing from the world one day at a time. And here's where the true crime story starts to get really, really unsettling, because the people of Poitiers didn't just forget about Blanche Monnier. There were warning signs along the way. Loud warning signs, the kind of warning signs an entire neighborhood noticed. And every single one of those warning signs was ignored. The first sign was the smell. Now, anybody who has ever lived near a house that doesn't get aired out knows the kind of smell I'm talking about. Except this smell coming out of the Monnier home was something else entirely. Neighbors complained about it. Visitors mentioned it. People walking past the house would crinkle their nose and quicken their pace. There were even quiet, hushed rumors floating around the town that something wasn't right inside that respectable Monnier home. Maybe a sick relative, maybe a hidden secret, maybe something far worse. But every single time those rumors started, somebody in town would shrug and say, well, that's the Monnier home. They go to church, they give to charity, they're good people, leave them alone. And so for 25 years, 25 entire years, longer than some marriages, longer than some careers, longer than an entire generation of children growing up, the people of Poitiers smelled the truth seeping out of that house and chose to believe a polite lie instead. And then, finally, in late May of 1901, somebody in that town broke. To this very day, nobody knows who exactly wrote the letter. But somebody, maybe a servant, maybe a relative, maybe a neighbor who simply couldn't sleep anymore, sat down with a piece of paper and wrote an anonymous letter directly to the Attorney General of Poitiers. The letter was short, the letter was specific, and the letter contained one sentence that would have sent a shiver down the spine of every single official who read it. There is a woman locked up in the Monnier home, half starved, living on a filthy mattress for the past 25 years. The Attorney General read that letter. The Attorney General read it again. And then, despite the Monnier name carrying every ounce of social weight in that town, he did something almost unheard of for that time period. The Attorney General sent the police. Now imagine being one of the officers who knocked on that front door. Imagine standing on that porch of a house that the entire town adored, holding a letter so wild it sounded like fiction, about to confront a woman beloved by every priest, every neighbor, and every charity board in that entire region. The officers were not expecting to find anything. The officers fully expected Louise Monnier to laugh it off, smooth the whole thing over, and send them on their way. And for the first few minutes, that's exactly what Louise Monnier tried to do. Louise Monnier answered the door herself. Louise Monnier told the officers there was absolutely nothing to investigate inside the Monnier home. Louise Monnier tried to block the officers from coming in. She tried to keep the officers downstairs. She tried every charming, polite delay tactic in the book. But Louise Monnier could not lie her way around one thing: the smell. The moment the officers crossed the threshold, The smell was undeniable. And the smell didn't come from the kitchen. The smell didn't come from the cellar. The smell came from the second floor in one specific room, behind one specific locked door. The officers told Louise Monnier to open the door. At first, she refused. The officers told her again. Louise Monnier refused again. And so the officers stepped back, took a breath, and forced the door open. What those officers saw inside that room is something none of them would ever forget for the rest of their lives. The shutters had been bolted shut for so many years that no daylight had touched the inside of that room in decades. The air was thick and stagnant. The floor was buried in years of old food scraps and neglect. And on a filthy mattress in the corner of that room was a person, a real, living, breathing person who barely resembled a human being anymore. That person was Blanche Monnier. She was now around 52 years old. Blanche Monnier weighed barely 55 pounds. Blanche Monnier's hair had grown so long it reached past her ankles. Blanche Monnier's skin was so fragile it could not tolerate light. Her voice could barely form words anymore. And Blanche Monnier had been kept inside that one tiny room for 25 years. Now, set the Lego Speed Champions Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat down for just one moment, because here's where the true crime case of Blanche Monnier takes a turn that even the most seasoned true crime fans didn't see coming. Because the listener is probably sitting there thinking, well, surely Louise Monnier paid for what Louise Monnier did, right? Surely she rotted in a jail cell, stood in a courtroom, and looked at the starved daughter and answered for every single one of those 25 years. But Louise Monnier never stood trial. She was arrested. She was taken into custody. The whole town of Poitiers turned on Louise Monnier overnight. The same town that had spent 25 years smelling the truth and choosing not to ask. But just 15 days after Blanche Monnier was discovered in that upstairs room, Louise Monnier, sitting in police custody, suddenly died. Officially, the cause was natural. Unofficially, plenty of people had their own theories. Either way, the woman who orchestrated the entire 25-year nightmare slipped out of accountability before a single trial could begin. And Blanche Monnier's older brother, Marcel Monnier, the man who had lived in the same house the entire time, the man who had walked past that locked door every single day for 25 years, Marcel was actually charged. He was actually put on trial, and Marcel Monnier, in a verdict that still makes true crime historians shake their heads to this day, was acquitted. The court accepted the defense that Marcel Monnier had simply been following his mother's wishes. And just like that, no one, not Marcel Monnier, not a servant, not a neighbor, not a single person who smelled the truth, ever served a day for what had been done to Blanche Monnier. And here is the part of the true crime story that almost nobody talks about. The part that makes the Blanche Monnier case feel less like a story from 1901 and more like a warning bell ringing across every decade since. Because when the officers carried Blanche Monnier out of that room and into the daylight for the first time in 25 years, she did not cry out for joy. She did not weep with relief. She didn't even throw her arms around the rescuers. She flinched from the light. She was disoriented by simple fresh air. Her mind, by every account from the doctors who examined her, had been broken in ways that were beyond repair. Blanche Monnier was placed in psychiatric care. She never returned to anything resembling a normal life. And just 12 years after the so-called rescue in 1913, Blanche Monnier quietly passed away inside that institution, never having truly experienced freedom again. The real twist of the Blanche Monnier true crime story isn't the locked door. The real twist isn't the 25 years. The real twist isn't even the mother who slipped past justice. The real twist is that an entire town smelled something wrong, gossiped about something wrong, suspected something wrong, and stayed quiet anyway. Because the family was respectable, because the mother was charitable, because asking would have been rude. Blanche Monnier didn't disappear because nobody saw. She disappeared because everybody saw and everybody decided to look the other way. And here's the strangest part of all of it. If anybody watching thinks the Blanche Monnier case is the only true crime story where a mother dressed up as a saint while quietly destroying a daughter behind closed doors, buckle up, because the next true crime story on this channel is about another daughter in another decade in another little house behind another perfect mother's smile. A girl in a wheelchair the girl didn't actually need, a mother the entire world called a hero until the night that mother didn't survive, and one short Facebook post made up of only 5 words that blew the whole story wide open. The true crime case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard is sitting right next to this one on the channel. And the version of that story most viewers know is missing one massive detail that changes everything. Click that true crime story next. See you there.